Okay, welcome everybody back to the modern revolution. So glad you decided to come back and listen again. As you know, we talk to people who they have a lot of accomplishments and a lot of interesting thing that's about them, but we don't tell you about that. We instead encourage you to listen to them. And then as you listen, if things resonate, then we'll give you ways in which you can find them at the end. But I prefer for people to listen to what we have to say here and then make their own decisions rather than be told, hey, this is an authority. And because they're an authority, that, what they say is important. So, with that, today I'm lucky to have my guest, Ann Hince. And Ann, thank you for taking time for coming to visit.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And so, Ann, I like to begin our conversations with trying to understand, what is the problem in the world you're tackling?
Okay. Well, my goal is to find inner peace and to become
Okay,
imperturbable. So
very
peaceful
nice.
regardless of what is happening around me. And then to share that with other people because I believe the more peaceful we are on the inside, the more peace there is on the outside. And we all
Yes.
need that now.
Yeah, that I remember in a story, one of those like short stories designed to instruct, and it was, in I think it was along the lines of like a Confucius story. And what they were saying is they give a kid a picture of the world and they tear it up and they say, assemble the picture of the world. But it's too complicated for the kid. He can't remember. But he realizes if he flipped it over, there's a picture of a human being, something he can recognize. And then he's able to put it together. And the intention was like, if we can put ourselves together, we actually put the world together. And that linkage always stayed with me as a true thing, that everything starts with us. So as somebody who's looking to create an inner peace that then will create an outer peace around us. Like, what does that mean now? What type of work are you doing to bring that about?
Okay, well, I'm doing it mostly on myself and I'm sharing my story because I've developed abilities that I did not know were possible before. I
Okay.
didn't know that you could shift your skull bones just with
Oh,
focused attention. And I
okay.
didn't know you could grow in your 50s, right? Because most of us start shrinking because we're holding so much burden
That's
down for all those
interesting.
years. So, in releasing the burden, in releasing our past, right? Releasing the emotions that have been stuck inside, that burden starts to lift. And then, we find inner peace on the inside, but we also release the tension in our body. So, we find more physical peace as well.
Okay. So, I mean, as we go along, and I'm in my 50s, so I'm 53, and I can certainly attest to that. The longer you live, the more experiences weigh on you, both good and bad. I think, they carry your life with you as you go. So, so tell me more about the notion of actually changing your physical structure. I mean, you're talking about shifting your skull bones, and I'm not sure that everybody would be familiar with that idea. So, describe what you're talking about.
I wouldn't have been either. I had no idea that that was even going to happen along the way. And it's been a long process. I've probably been doing this work for close to 20 years at this point.
Okay.
And certainly I couldn't do what I can do now when I started this journey. So
Okay.
I started out being a very fearful person. I was very reactionary, kind of highly strung, I would say.
Okay.
And I did have something happen along the way that kind of started me on this journey where I really realized I had just this little inkling actually that my childhood was still affecting me.
Okay.
And that was in my late 30s.
Right.
And that was the start of the journey. And I didn't know what to do at the point. I just knew I had to change because I just hated the way I was. I hated the way I
Okay.
reacted all the time. It was
Okay.
not a good place to be.
Yeah.
And I actually went to a doctor's appointment
Okay.
who's a holistic physician. And I can't remember why I went to him, but it was nothing to do with my emotions or my past or anything.
Right.
But he happened to realize I was more stressed than I should be because I
Okay.
was a stay at home mother with two young, healthy boys. It shouldn't have been that stressful.
Okay.
And he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was. And I said 8. And then he asked me why. And that's when I realized, oh, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was
Oh my
9.
goodness. Oh, good Lord.
So now I'm in my late 30s when this process started. So it was 2 decades later. But the
Yes.
tears from that event when I was 19 was still just under the surface. I
Mm,
had spent so much energy pushing that all down that
yes.
there was just so much pressure, and I was just so reactive because of that. But he happened to know this technique that is called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping
Right?
because we tap on certain places in our body as we talk something through. And he tapped with me on my mother's death for about 15 minutes. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind for the first time ever without those tears there. So that's when I realized that we store the history, the memories, the emotions physically in our body, and that
Yes.
we can let them go. So that was the beginning of my journey.
So, oh boy, there's so much you just said. I mean, so let me try to paraphrase what I heard. First of all, I mean that's a story of incredible trauma. I mean, that you lose your mother at a young age, and then to come upon her passed in front of you is is a certain trauma. And I think that many people have something, if not that has troubled them to one degree or another. And I think you're saying that in a sense we metabolize our experience, like we hold those experiences in the body right there, and that we get constricted in a way that is hard to release. And for you, this emotional freedom technique, this tapping, uh, link somehow your physical body to your emotional, I don't know what the right term would be, but you were constricted in some way because of these feelings were holding you tightly bound, and it was, as you say, you were high strung, right? Which means that
Right.
there was a lot of tension. I mean, is that a fair kind of paraphrase of what you just said to me? I mean, tell me
Yeah.
where it could be better
Except at
or
the
more
time,
precise.
I had no idea that it was connected to the physical. So all I was
Okay.
working on at the time was just the emotions, the
Yes.
energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
The memory of that. And that was just the biggest trauma. I had multiple other traumas. I had both my parents were alcoholics. I had a lot of teething, house
Okay.
fires, all sorts of things, adoption
Oh
in my
goodness.
past. But that was the big one that was kind of holding everything
Okay.
else down.
Yes.
So I had to work on that one first, and then I started working on it. I started working on using EFT every day, becoming aware of how I was feeling during the day. So if I was becoming emotional,
Right.
I would notice that, and that's the first step. It's not always
Yes.
an easy step.
Right.
When I became aware that I was becoming emotional, then I would tap. I would
Yes.
bring myself back to peace and carry on with my day, and then do it again. And
Okay.
I realized over those weeks that I was becoming more peaceful inside. I was becoming less reactionary. It was really nice, but I
Hmm.
wanted more and I
Okay.
wanted it faster.
Okay. Okay.
So I wrote down all my traumas, everything I could remember
Wow.
from
Okay.
childhood, all my humiliations, all my embarrassments, all the big traumas, little traumas, all the phrases that my parents or caregivers would use. And I tapped through one each night. I was determined to change. And
Yes.
as the weeks went by, I noticed that my mind was becoming quieter. Now, I
Mm.
had never experienced that before. I didn't even know it was possible. I'd heard
Yeah.
people talk about it, but I
Yes.
didn't know
Yes.
you could go from a really busy mind to a very quiet mind.
Right.
And it was at that point that I could look back and say, okay, those phrases that I used to use in my mind, right, the ones that would replay over and over, the
Yes.
self critical, self judgment ones,
Right.
they had been my dad's phrases that I had been programmed with in childhood.
How
And I
interesting.
just replayed them without realizing it.
Right. That movement, I mean, there's a lot of things I think that movement of things that are in the lizard brain, in our less, and moving them from there into the executive function of our brain where we're, making decisions rather than reacting. And that I think has a lot of utility in life, beyond even the healing of trauma, but also in terms of moving from being okay at something for being really good at something. So I think it has like a healing quality to it. And then it has an optimal, people seek to be the best versions of themselves. I think as much as you're operating out of the executive function of your brain rather than, what I would consider the reactive lizard part of your brain, the better. What was the linkage? How would you describe the linkage between why tapping your body allowed you to make that journey from reacting to deciding? Like, why did the tapping of your body give you a tool that you wouldn't have otherwise had?
What I realized is that the tapping itself, the physical action of tapping on these points, and they're the ends of meridian systems, so they have
Okay.
some reasoning behind the points themselves. It
Okay.
releases the tension that is stored in the or in the connective tissue, but the oh, forgotten the words.
Right, right.
Um, it's stored in the body with and attached to those memories.
Okay.
So as we do the tapping, it releases that energy that is stuck inside. So you do it multiple times with the
Right.
same memory. So I would tap through my mother's death, everything that happened that day
Yes.
from
Yeah.
the beginning to the end, and then I'd go back to the beginning and tap through it again. It's the
Okay.
nervous system is the words I was thinking of. It releases the
Yes.
energy from the nervous system. So then I would tap through it again and then again, and each time the subconscious mind is opening up a little bit more. So more
Interesting.
details of the memory
Okay.
come to mind and
Okay.
maybe more emotions that have been inside. And you keep doing it until it becomes just a boring memory, right? There's no emotion left. It's like you're reading from a book. And at that point, you know it's been released. You what I call you've forgiven it. You've let go
Okay.
of everything that happens. And then it stops coming into your mind anymore, right?
Okay.
The memories of it just fade away. They're still there. You can access them, but the emotions are no longer there. So it gets so you stop reacting to things because they're not reminding you of those events anymore, right? You've let
Okay.
go of those emotions stored inside. And what I realized as time went by, so this is like the first step of my journey, which is a 3-step journey. What I realized is EFT is opening up the subconscious mind. And as it does that, our self awareness deepens. So
Okay.
we become aware of ourselves at a deeper level.
Right.
So what that means is I started to become aware of my emotions that I
Mhm.
had not been aware of before.
Okay.
And then I became aware of the physical sensations underneath the emotions. So
Okay.
if you're feeling frustrated, you're actually holding tension in your body in certain places,
Hmm.
but you may not be aware of it to begin with. I was not aware at that level. I could not have told you where I was holding tension
Yeah,
when I
that's
felt
interesting.
frustrated,
Okay.
but I became aware, right? So that's a deepening of self awareness.
Yes. So, I think of other traditions that have these ideas in them. Like I think about yoga saying, the issues are in the tissues, where like that, particularly if people who have been to yin yoga, where the long holds of allowing things to open over time, that some people become emotional in that experience because as you just said, like in the body whole these s- experiences are stored and then they're being opened up. And certainly, when we talk about like endpoints and those type of things, I mean, I think that acupuncture and acupressure has got thousands of years of history in terms of like touching yourself in a certain area, putting a needle in a certain area, connecting to the energy system of the body in a way that changes it. And so it sounds to me like these are similar ideas, that you're tapping that allows you to begin the process of knowing what you're feeling, having a relationship to it that's differently, and then ultimately, as you talk about, becoming imperturbable, which I think's a wonderful goal. So, as you go through that journey, I mean, it sounds like there's some real specific things that come out of it relative to like what's possible in the change of your body. So, could you talk a little bit about that? Like, as you deepened your relationship to this practice, obviously you became more peaceful inside. Maybe you could talk about how that also reflected in your body, because I think that you made some changes that are not typical.
Yeah, well, let me skip to the second step on my
Oh,
journey because
excuse.
it,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
was a whole journey, and
yeah.
I didn't notice things right until further along the way. So the second part of the journey was once I was aware of those physical sensations
Hmm.
underneath the emotions. At that point, I did more what you were talking about with that yin journey or the yoga journey.
Right.
I would focus on the sensations themselves rather than using the words of the memories or the
Oh,
emotions.
okay.
I would just focus on that tension. If I was feeling frustrated, I'd focus on that tension itself and I would hold my
Right.
awareness on the tension and it would release. So, kind of like what you're
Okay.
talking about,
Yeah.
I worked out eventually it's the connective tissue that I'm focusing on the connective tissue or the
r-
fascia
Right.
and the tension would release. So then I started doing that during the day. So if I thought a thought that had some emotion attached to it,
Okay.
something like I'm afraid of making this phone call, right? That's a simple example.
Right.
I would notice where that fear was inside of me. I would focus on it, release it, think the thought again. do it again and again, just like with EFT, where you do the story again and again until the emotion had released,
Okay.
until the sensations or the energy that was stuck inside had released.
So your awareness, I just want to understand what you just said. So your awareness of your anxiety of a particular thing, you could trace that to a specific place in your body that you were noticing where you were tightening. Was there a place in which it showed up more often than others?
For me, yeah, solar plexus, stomach area.
Okay. All
Yes,
right. Well,
absolutely, which makes sense because I had a lot of digestive issues, from holding all that tension. I think a lot
yeah.
of us do.
Well, and the digestive system holds the enteric nervous system, right? So there's more neuro cells in your intestines than there are in your brain, you know. So I think when we talk about gut health, that gut mind connection, which is frequently discussed, is not a gut feeling is something more than just a feeling in your stomach, right? I think you're
Yes,
actually thinking down there. So okay, so in your solar plexus, in your that part of your body, you would notice tension more often there than other places. And so that's not the easiest place per se. It's not like your hamstrings. Like what would you do to kind of address that physical part?
so what I call this is just feeling your feelings, which sounds easier than it really is. And I had to
Okay.
teach myself to do it because we're so used to suppressing those feelings.
Okay.
The feelings themselves, the sensations themselves, are not used to being noticed, acknowledged, or felt. They're used to being suppressed.
Okay.
So the first time I did this, I was standing at the kitchen sink doing the dishes. And
Okay.
I wanted to try this out because I had someone that kept saying, you don't need to meditate. All you have to do is feel your feelings.
Okay.
To begin with, I didn't know what that meant. And I had to do the EFT. That for me, that was a first step that I had to go through in order to become aware of
Okay.
the feelings. So I thought, okay, let me do this. So I noticed a thought which had emotion attached. Now, of course, that itself is not easy to do. You have to
Yes.
practice that. But I would notice the thought and then I would notice where the feeling was. So this example of the fear in the solar plexus. I noticed that if I moved, I lost my focus on it. Or if I
Okay.
took a deep breath, I lost my focus on it. So what
Huh.
I had to do is I'd feel where the fear was in my
Right.
solar plexus and I would stop. I'd hold myself like a statue. I wouldn't take any more breath. I'd just stop in my breath when I could feel that fear. And I
Okay.
would talk to it. I would say things like, okay, I can feel you sitting right there in my solar plexus. I just want to feel you. I want to allow you to be felt. And of course, I'd have to take a deep breath at some point, and then I would
Sure.
think the thought again. I'm afraid of making this phone call. And I would notice that the fear had dissipated somewhat. So
Right.
I would do it again and again and again. And then the fear would disappear, at which point then it becomes easy to make the phone call.
Yes. Yes. So okay, so in this journey there was this sort of beginning opening up to kind of recognize these things, and as you're making your way through your journey, you're getting more and more precise, it sounds like you're
Right.
recognizing,
Honing the focus
honing the focus,
almost,
right.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
So go to the next step
Yes,
because
I was
that
going to
was the
ask what
last
is the
one.
third step? Yeah.
So at some point when I was doing this, I would actually lay on the sofa and I would bring collective traumas to mind.
Okay.
Something like 9/11 or the Loma Prieta
Oh,
earthquake that I was in, because we all have our own individual experience of those collective
sure.
traumas. So I'd bring all those memories to mind and just allow those emotions that had been stored inside to release.
Mm,
Felt really good. I mean, it was a fun thing to do.
okay.
And at some point during that process, I realized I could keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released. So I didn't know what I was doing. It was kind of fun. It was weird. I had no idea. I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah.
So I was just playing. So I realized I'd done it once. Could I do it again? And I realized I could. And then I started to move my awareness around inside.
Mm,
And at the time, I was working in my torso, my solar plexus area,
okay.
moved my awareness around to the right. And I realized I could find a place that had tension compared to a place that had no
That's
tension.
interesting.
So I would do the same thing. I would focus on it. I would just feel it. I'm not trying to change it, not trying to release it, although that's the obvious intention long term. I'm just accepting it,
Mhm.
feeling it. And I would notice it would release a little bit. So then I started doing this over and over throughout my body. Again, it felt really good, right? Because it's tension that's been stored inside for decades.
Yes, how
And
interesting.
sometimes during this process, when a area of tension would release, a memory would pop
Mhm.
into my mind.
Okay.
that's had been stored with it, and it would just release. So I just keep doing this over and over. And eventually, many, many months into this process, I was able to put my awareness inside my head.
Okay.
And that was a huge revelation because there was so much pain and tension inside my left cheek that it was
That's
almost
interesting.
unbearable.
Whoa.
But it had been there all along, my whole life, because I was born with my right foot up against my right shin. My whole body was twisted.
Okay.
And this pain in my tension in my left cheek is connected to the tension in my right foot
Okay.
through the connective tissue. So at this point, I had this technique, right? So I just focus on it. And to begin with, it could only be a second because it was so painful. But over time, I just focus, release. And it actually got to the point that I actually heard and felt something release, and it
That's
sounded like
interesting. Yeah.
old fabric ripping.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
That was a
Right.
little scary. That was when I had to look up online what was happening, and I realized there was an adhesion in the connective tissue that was
Okay.
releasing.
Okay.
So I just kept doing that, and it got to the place where I actually could feel my skull bones relax. Now, I hadn't noticed. I didn't
Right.
know they were not relaxed before that.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah.
I had to allow them to relax and then and look back and say, okay, yeah, clearly they were, and I didn't know it. So
Right.
all of that made me realize how much we store in our subconscious mind, but we are just not aware of it until we're ready to be shown it.
Yeah. So as you are able to hone your focus so precisely that you can feel that the the exact area of your jaw that's holding, tension from whichever trauma had happened in the past, collective or personal. And then you're in the bones of your skull, you can actually feel, tension that was there. It must have been an unusual experience to kind of become I think I'm an athlete. I like to move. I consider myself a physical person. I feel myself. I think good proprioception. I know where my body is in space most of the time. However, I'm trying to think. I'm pretty confident. I don't know what's going on in my skull bones. Like I don't. And I've done yoga and meditation. I'm not unfamiliar with the principles of the things that you're talking about. As you began to have that level of precision, it sounds like some things started to happen that were also unexpected in terms of, how your body changed the more you got to know it in a sense. And what happened?
Yeah, things start loosening up, and
Okay.
the whole journey, things start loosening up, right? It's almost like it's exponential.
Okay.
We're so tight, or at least I was so tight to
Yes.
begin with, had to loosen up little bit by little bit. But as
Yeah.
things start to loosen up, then all sorts of changes start to
Okay.
happen, especially in the physical body. And everywhere I've released tension in my body, it's also released in my neck. So it's
Okay.
like I have an inner chiropractor at this point. So it
Yes.
cracks many, many times a day as I'm
That's interesting.
releasing deep tension. But I'm not really connected to the memories or the words as much, right? That was the beginning of the journey,
Okay.
the memories and the emotion.
Yeah.
Now I'm focusing directly in the bones themselves, in the connective tissue themselves. But I still do EFT, right? If something triggers me, I will still tap
Right.
the EFT. And so there's multiple different techniques that you can use depending on the amount of trigger or how much you want to work on the inside.
Okay. So the tools of the beginning remain, the tools that you use today to a certain extent, and you use them differently than you might have done in the beginning, but they stay with you as something that kind of helps this journey continue along. So there may be someone listening and they have always been anxious and they don't know why. Like they're similar to you. What's a thing that you might say to a person like that maybe even it's irritability, that they know they're irritable and they don't want to be irritable. They don't know why. Because I think anxiety can present in a variety of ways. It can present in a fear, like you're afraid of something. I think it can present a certain aggressiveness can sometimes come out of it, out of a way to protect yourself. But someone out there might have a self-awareness that they would like to be different than they are today. I also find it interesting you were 39 or their late 30s, whenever that would be, because I feel like you have to have a certain amount of life experience to come. I don't know that you could have done that any other time prior to that, is my opinion, because I think there's a certain amount of strength that you need to know you've survived X amount of years in whatever difficulty, and also to recognize a certain level of exhaustion. Like, I can't do it like this any longer. But someone in their 20s, I don't that even if you had gotten some advice or some earlier in your life, it would have had the same effect. I could be wrong about that, but let's just say someone's out there at a similar juncture, like they'd like to make some changes. Like, what types of things would you advise to that person to begin to do to I don't know whether the beginning is to figure out how to name things, or what would you tell them?
Well, you had some great words there. So with EFT, the thing is you don't have to know why,
Okay.
because it's a layer by layer process of opening up the subconscious mind. So if all
Yes.
you know is that you're anxious,
Right, right.
that's what you would tap on. You're
Okay.
using the words, I'm anxious right now. And whatever those words are, maybe you're irritable, right? You just tap on, I'm irritable right now. And I don't know why, right? If you
Okay.
don't know why, that's what you tap on.
Right.
As you release that layer or accept that you're irritable and release the tension or the resistance in that sort,
Yeah.
a memory is likely to pop up, or some
Okay.
realization of why you're irritable is likely to pop up. And
Okay.
then you work on that. But
Okay.
the first thing is you have to notice how you're feeling, right? That's always the first step. A lot of times we just get caught up in our emotions and
Yes.
we be irritable, right? We
Yes,
be
yes, right, right,
irritable with
yes.
other people. We have to stand back and say, okay, I am becoming irritable, or I'm feeling
Yeah.
irritable. Then you can do something about it. Right? And
Okay.
I recommend EFT because it's free, easy to
Yes.
learn. My video on YouTube, I think, is 6 minutes.
Yeah,
And
let's talk a little bit about like recommendations along those lines, because my familiarity with EFT, and and one of the things that I like about it, I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I have a passing familiarity with it. And among the things that I like is the safety. Like, it's not going to hurt anybody to do EFT. And so much of our conversations move towards medication, and honestly, I think medication has its place. So I don't want to say that like there's never a time that medication doesn't play a role in it, but there are so many other tools in the world that I think are not discussed sufficiently, where people. So tell us a little bit about where somebody could find you on YouTube to watch the 6 minutes to learn something that might be the thin end of the thread that they start to pull in knowledge that they wouldn't otherwise find.
okay, my YouTube channel is just my name. So Ann Hince, ANNHINCE, with
Okay.
the at the beginning. But
Okay.
a couple of things about EFT. It was developed by Gary Craig, who is
Okay.
or was a chemical engineer. So I love that about it.
Yes. Yes.
It works with the negative. A lot of people think that we need to go positive or think
Hmm.
positively. And a
Sure.
lot of people have done that with EFT. They've used it more for tapping on the positive.
Okay.
However, because I can sense inside the body now, I know that it's only the negative that is stored in the body.
Okay.
All we have to do is find the negative, let it go, and that the positive is already there underneath.
Okay. Okay.
So stick with the negative with EFT, at least to begin with, and allow the energy to release. So I do have that one demo video on there on my YouTube channel. I've also got one about what words to use with EFT, because that's
Okay.
where people tend to get caught up. They don't know what to say. So
Interesting.
you could check that out as well.
Okay. And so the person that may be fearful of change, like, do you have any advice for the person who's like, I think that when we are so familiar with feeling even bad, I find this a lot in food. I think that we have the walking well in the country much, right? Like, they're not sick per se, but they don't really recognize how good they can feel. And a lot of times it's their diet that is slowly poisoning them, in that if they had a period of time in which they experienced healthy food for a long enough period of time that they detox from all the bad food they're eating, they'd have a better window into how they should feel day in and day out. And in some senses, I see this as an analogy that there is people that don't recognize their birthright of feeling more joyful, less perturbable, less at the whim of a moment to moment. set of anxieties that come seemingly out of nowhere. But we get accommodated to feeling a certain way, and changing that can sometimes be its own source of anxiety. So, do you have anything to kind of help somebody bridge their way into doing nothing to doing something? Because I can't imagine, given what you've said today, that it was easy, even though it was good. Like, I mean, it must have had its own set of concerns, hardship in its own sort of way to let go of something that had been with you for so long and to kind of re envision who you could be.
We do. We kind of get scared of looking at our past. We think it's going to annihilate us sometimes
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
so scary. But for me, one of the things I did that day that I got back from the doctor's office is, first of all, I researched EFT online.
Right.
But also, I wanted to try it out because I also have an engineering background. I was a
Okay.
software engineer. I like to make sure things work before invest my time in them.
Right.
So I wanted to try EFT out on something small. So at the time, I had a 17-year-old cat at home, and we'd
That's
been
interesting.
told his kidneys were failing.
Okay.
So he had to have a daily saline shot, like an injection of saline solution. And the first time I gave him that shot, my hand was shaking so
Yeah,
badly.
yeah,
I was
yeah.
so afraid of giving him this shot. So
Sure.
I thought, okay, let me try out this technique. So I tapped about it. I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you want to do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking, tapped about my fear of hurting the cat,
Yeah.
and I tapped about all the memories I had from the injections I had had over the years.
Okay.
The next day, when I gave him that shot, the needle slid right in.
Yes.
All that fear that had been sitting inside of me before, the day before, had
Right.
totally disappeared. So
Interesting.
that's when I realized, so first of all, I realized how powerful EFT was because that was huge for me. But I also realized that those emotions and that energy is just stored inside of us. And all we have to do is let it go, and this freedom is on the other side.
Yes.
And I wanted to find that freedom. So if I could take that mindset with everything that triggered me from my past, I knew that there was freedom on the other side. So I was determined to find that freedom.
Yeah.
It made it easier to do the work.
That's fascinating. Well, and I think, thank you for spending time with us today. And, you have a great way of describing things in a precise way. So as a scientist, as a computer engineer, that background, I think having a level of precision in these conversation is helpful, because I think too easy these things can slide into language that people distrust, because it's almost supernatural language. And although I believe that the spiritual world is with us and there are things unseen that is, important to try to name, I think there are other aspects of living that there's roads to getting better, right? Like, and people who have gone down them before can point the way, like, hey, this seems like it's impossible. It seems like you could never be relaxed, you could never be peaceful. But people who have gone from being anxious and worried and all that to being, peaceful, or at least less anxious, less, well, I don't know if we ever eliminate, right, those things altogether, but we need to know what to do. And so thanks for telling us your story. And I hope that everybody goes and watches your 6-minute video at a minimum, because I think there will come a time, if if you feel like you've never been overwhelmed by something, I can assure you that something in life will overwhelm you. And being equipped with tools to kind of get you through that, I think has a lot of value. So thanks for sharing everything today.
Thank you. Thanks for the great conversation.
So Anne is, I consider her a modern revolutionary, and she's bringing to you and to the world ideas about how to make things better. And she's telling her personal story for you, not just for herself. She's trying to share knowledge, and I'm grateful that she's doing so. I hope that not only do you get to learn from Anne in terms of what she's saying, but that you're emboldened to go on your own path and to bring your voice to the world too, because the modern revolution needs us all.